1100 BC, 1000 BC, there's a huge dispersal of Greek culture all over the Mediterranean. In the aftermath of this catastrophe of plagues and famine, people move, people migrate. And in their great migrations, they move across the Mediterranean to Italy, so all of southern Italy, all the western coast of Italy. Naples is a Greek foundation, Neapolis. The south coast of France. The red should really be up there in the north of Italy too, because above Genova, all those areas were founded by Greek colonists. Along the coast of France, southern France, and then all the way into Spain, and a big section of Spanish coast is also Greek colony. So this is important for tonight, because what we want to realize is that in 1000 BC, 900 BC, 800 BC, many Greeks are moving into Italy. And so one of the things that we will note as we start to talk about Rome tonight is that Rome, that is the Italian peninsula, has a variety of cultures. Things coming from the east from Greece, things coming from the west from Carthage, things coming from Europe and the Celts. So there's a variety of invading peoples arriving in the peninsula between 1000 and 0, and you can see that right there on our picture. The south of Italy becomes completely Greek. From Naples south, it's all Greek colonies. Some of the most important in the Mediterranean world in 700, 600 are in Italy. Sicily, one of the most important Greek cities is Syracuse. So the diaspora, the great Greek diaspora, tells us something about Italy. Second thing that tells us about Italy is this picture of the migration of the Etruscans that would have happened also because of the Bronze Age collapse. In other words, there is a whole people in Asia Minor who conclude that Asia Minor is a terrible place to be living. There's no food, there's plague, there's earthquakes. So they migrate. 500, 600, 700,000. The whole community migrates, and as you can see on a suggested pattern of their movement, from Asia Minor down along the coast of Syria, Israel, through Egypt, over to about the middle of the coast, and then boats across to Italy, and they land on the west coast of Italy. How do we know all this happened? Well, you can figure it out because they're not Indo-European. So that means they're not there. They're not in Italy in, say, 1500 or 14 or 1300 BC. They're not there. And when they get there, they're coming with languages that are newer than the Indo-European language, which would be Latin. So they obviously come sometime after 1300 or 1200, and it makes sense they came when the Bronze Age collapsed. And there's lots of reasons to think they came from Asia Minor. So there's another piece to help us explain what we're going to turn to tonight, Rome. If we talk about Italy in the year 1000, we now have a variety of influences there. Number one, we have peoples that are living there before the Indo-European invasions, before the Bronze Age charioteers. Then we have the Bronze Age charioteer invasions. 1800 BC, 1700 BC, just like they invaded Greece, just like they brought their language and their culture into Greece, so did they also do the same thing in Italy. Not as strongly, not as many people arrived, but still the same linguistic root. And so of all the languages of the Indo-European range of languages, Latin is closest to Greek. So those people who arrive in that peninsula carry with them a language very similar to their cousins over in Greece, and although the two languages evolve in slightly different ways, they're still the closest to the parent language. Okay, so that tells us something about the makeup of this place. We're looking at the Forum. We're looking into the eastern end of it. Up there in the far east, you can see the top of the Colosseum. Down through the middle of the picture, the wet pavement, that's the Via Sacra, the great central walkway of the Forum down which Caesar and Cicero and all the great Romans walked. And this is what we want to talk about here tonight. We want to talk about this third piece of the Western mind, this third structure, this third pillar that will help explain what we are in the year 1000. If we went way forward to the year 1000, here is one of the pieces. Now, how do we explain this near miraculous eruption of a city-state in the year 753? And we use that year, and I'm going to tell you more about it in a second. We use that year because that's the traditional year of the foundation of Rome. That's the legend, the story of Romulus and Remus, 753 BC. But first, let's just talk about what it was that Rome had that helped explain it. How could it be? How could it be created? How could it come into being? What exactly is the secret? First of all, of course, location, location, location. Everybody knows that, right? Anybody here is looking for a house? And so the first piece of the location is the relationship of this place to the peninsula. So that's the first thing, to the peninsula. Where on the peninsula does Rome sit? Well, it sits in a very special place on the biggest river running through Italy, that is the Tiber River. It starts way, way, way up in the north, runs right down through the center of the peninsula, and finally feeds into the Mediterranean at Ostia. So it's on a great river, exactly like Paris and exactly like London. So to start with, if you just think of those three great cities, all are about the same age, that is more than 2,000 years old, they're all sharing a similar quality, and that is they're on a river. They're on a river. And in the ancient world, that was a good thing. That's how you could get goods into your city. That's how you could get them out. And often crossing the river was the biggest question in 1000 BC. And therefore, if you had an island in the middle of the river, that was even better. And Rome has an island. So the local location had all kinds of advantages, very similar to Paris and London. On a river that needed to be crossed, also on a river that could bring goods from the interior into the outer to the out. So, number one, local location. That's the first thing. Second thing is, if you look at our Mediterranean picture that we started with tonight, it's in the middle of the Mediterranean, Italy, right? It's an advantageous position for the peninsula. It's advantageous for the rest of the peninsula, roughly halfway down. Actually, it's a little more than halfway. But it's a very, very advantageous position on the peninsula. And also, it's advantageous in relationship to the rest of the Mediterranean. It's in the middle. So if the Mediterranean expanded in population, and if that population moved all around the Mediterranean, both north and south coast, this peninsula sticking out in the middle was in even a better position than Greece. And that's what was happening. But of course, population had to move around the whole of the Mediterranean for this peninsular position to be the middle, and that's what was happening. So in the period of the growth of Rome, the Mediterranean is growing, population of Greece is growing, population of Israel and Syria and Damascus, they're growing. The North African coast is growing in population, the Carthaginians, and the population of Spain is growing. So you have a larger and larger population all the way around the Mediterranean, and Italy sits right in the middle of it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, it's in a great location that's already linked to the Greeks. The Greeks are just to the east. Greece is much like Italy, lots of coastland, and therefore the two countries share not only linguistic roots, but many, many of the sea lanes, sea routes, island travel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing for Italy to be in connection to Greece, which it was. Number two, it's in a location, a unique location for the Etruscans, the other people that it was going to be good for the Romans to be in touch with the Etruscans. Why? Why are the Etruscans? What was good about the Etruscans? Well, the Etruscans are really more advanced than Rome. When the Roman state is being founded and developed in 753. The Etruscans are already 200 or 300 years ahead of them in various cultural aspects, certainly in defense, certainly in architecture and building, various artistic, the evolution of culture, structure of families, the values of the actual, all of these things, the Etruscans were really ahead of the Italians, and so therefore the interchange that was going to take place between Etruscans and Romans was good. So there you have two people, the Greeks and the Etruscans, that can contribute or be creative in tension with Italy. And then the third people are the Carthaginians. Now the Carthaginians are across the Mediterranean on the North African coast in present-day Tunisia, where present-day Tunis sits. And so there was a third connection that was advantageous because the Carthaginians were also more advanced in certain ways, certainly in naval power, way more advanced, language more advanced. They had invented the alphabet, and therefore the interchange between the Italians, the Romans, and their competitors across the Mediterranean was going to be also advantageous. It was going to result in a war, and that was not good. A war was going to be bad, but the tension, the competition was going to drive the Italians forward. So you have Greeks, Etruscans, and Carthaginians all feeding into Italy, and therefore you can see that all roads really do lead to Rome. You see all these connections, whether to the east, to the south, to the north, or to the west, all of these cultures are feeding into this fascinating place sitting on the river. Here's a contemporary map. When you're in your car and you're heading to Rome, it's true, all roads lead to Rome. I mean, you can't miss it. If you've never gone there and you're worried about renting a car, it hurts, don't worry, you'll find Rome. And here's a nice picture of Rome that I like. It's a sky view, but then it also gives you some of the locations of things. You can see where the river is, which sort of snakes through the city on the western side there of your picture. And then in the middle is the circular Colosseum. You can pick that out. And if you use that as your marker and you look at a sort of a square with the Colosseum in the upper right of that square, that is the Forum, the Palatine Hill, the Capitoline Hill. In other words, where all of Rome is born, where all of the beginning of Rome can be found. And then the other hills, you can see there are 7 hills. They're all marked: the Quirinal Hill, the Viminal, the Esquiline, the Palatine, the Caelian Hill, the Aventine, and the Capitoline. There's a nice little map that shows you where those hills are. And if we just go back to the picture again, you can see there's a valley that goes between the Palatine and the Aventine. So there's a nice valley there, so that cuts off the Palatine Hill from the Aventine. Then there's another valley that runs to the Colosseum, and that's Via San Gregorio. That's a street name for St. Gregory, the first great pope. So there's that little. Then here's the one I just mentioned. Here's the Aventine, and there's the Palatine. And then the low territory of the Forum. And then at the end of it, at the western end of it, is the Capitoline Hill, which is the capital, which is still the capital of the city of Rome. It's been the capital of the city of Rome for 2,700 years. So it's still the capital. The mayor of Rome works on the top of the Capitoline Hill. And then across from that are the other hills, the Esquiline and the Viminale and the Quirinale, 7 hills all clustered together. This little model of first century Rome is helpful because it lets you understand what things looked like in that first century. You can see the Colosseum, you can see the Campus Maximus, so that's right there. That's that valley I showed you on the previous map. There's the other one. And here's our river, and there's the little island. Now we're going to go back to that in a second because that's really the most important place in all of Rome. The existence of that island is really the explanation of Rome coming into existence the way it did. This map lets you see a little better contemporary map, and it's nice to be able to connect all these historical things we're talking about to places that you might have seen if you've been there. So, for example, over there on the right of our yellow and green map is the train station. So the main train station of Rome, way there on the right, you can see it coming in slight diagonal. And way on the left is the Vatican. And if you think of modern-day Rome with those two edges, the station, the main train station, and the Vatican, it's really the frame of what you're going to visit most of the time during your time in Rome. That's pretty much everything. You can go out of Rome, of course, but if you want to visit all the different places, the Pantheon, the Forum, it's all within those two extremities, the station on the east and the Vatican on the west. The Vatican, of course, is across the river, and in the middle of the river is that island. Here's Rome in the first century when it is beginning to reach its maximum extent. we know that by 200 AD, Rome has really reached the biggest size of the empire ever, in the sense that all those parts are still held to the capital, Rome. So there's a good picture. So it includes Great Britain, it includes Spain, it goes up to the Rhine, up to the Danube, all the way to the east, all of Asia Minor, the coast of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and of course in the time of Caesar, it'll include Egypt, and North Africa once they conquer the Carthaginians. So there you have the extent of it.